He slid a folded contract across the table, his voice calm, but dangerous. "Marry me," he said. "Think of it as business. Poor girl pays bus fare for a stranger. Days later, he offers a contract that changes her life." Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy cinematic love stories about millionaires and second chances, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. Also, tell me in the comments where you are watching from, your city, your state, or your country. Now, let us get back to our main character. The rain drummed against the windows of a small Seattle café as Clara Hayes stirred her half-empty cup of coffee. Her apron still smelled of fryer oil from the diner where she worked double shifts. Rent was late again, her mother's hospital bill was due next week, and her shoes had a hole the size of a quarter near the toe. But she still smiled when she noticed a man step onto the crowded bus outside the window. Earlier that day, that same man had been a stranger at the bus stop, shivering in a thin gray jacket. When he realized his wallet was gone, he froze in embarrassment. Without thinking, Clara had pulled $2 crumpled from her pocket and paid his fare. "You do not owe me anything," she had said softly. "Just pay it forward." She never expected to see him again. 3 days later, he walked into the cafe, dressed sharply in a charcoal suit that did not belong to an ordinary commuter. His name was Adrian Wells, tall, composed, with the kind of confidence that made the room go quiet for half a second. He sat at the counter and waited until Clara finished refilling a customer's mug. "Miss Hayes," he said when she approached, recognizing her instantly. "You gave me a ride when I had nothing. I would like to repay that kindness properly." Clara blinked, confused. "It was just $2, sir. You do not have to." He unfolded a leather folder on the counter. Inside was a formal document, embossed with a gold crest. "I own Wells and Hartman Group," he said evenly. "I need someone to pose as my fiancé for 6 weeks. In return, I will settle your mother's medical debt and fund your design program. You helped me when you thought I had nothing. Now, let me help you." Her hand trembled around the coffee pot. "This is insane. You do not even know me." Adrian's eyes softened. "That is exactly why I trust you." The words hung in the air, louder than the hiss of the espresso machine. Clara looked at the contract again, neat lines of legal text, her name already typed at the top. She wanted to laugh, to run, to believe. Instead, she whispered, "And if I say yes?" "Then your life changes tonight," he replied, sliding the silver pen toward her. She stared at the reflection of her tired face in the metal barrel, the storm outside flashing behind her. $2 had bought a stranger's bus fare, and maybe, just maybe, a completely new beginning. The contract was real. Clara ran her finger over the embossed seal as Adrian watched her from across the table. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes softened when she whispered, "6 weeks? Pretending to be your fiancé?" "Yes," he said quietly. 6 weeks of events, dinners, and public appearances. After that, you are free. Your mother's bills will be paid in full. You can return to your studies." The rain outside turned heavier, blurring the neon lights beyond the window. Clara folded the paper, slipped it back into the folder, and stood up. "I need time to think," Adrian nodded. "You have 24 hours. That night, her mind did not rest. She stared at the ceiling of her small apartment, the steady drip of water from a leaking pipe marking every minute. Her roommate was gone for the weekend, the silence pressing like a weight. She thought about her mother in the hospital, her weak voice on the phone that morning. "Do not worry about me, honey. Just promise you will. Keep going." By dawn, Clara had made her decision. At precisely 8 o'clock, a black sedan waited outside the diner. Adrian stepped out, dressed in gray again, but without the distance of a stranger this time. She walked toward him, the contract in her hand. "I will sign," she said softly. "But only if you promise one thing." He raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "No one gets hurt," she said. "No lies that will ruin someone else's life." Adrian hesitated for a fraction of a second, then extended his hand. Agreed. The pen felt cold between her fingers. Her signature was small and careful, like she was carving a new version of herself. Hours later, she was standing inside the marble lobby of the Wells and Hartman headquarters, feeling completely out of place. The glass walls gleamed. Every surface smelled faintly of citrus and money. Assistants in tailored suits moved quickly, whispering into earpieces. Adrian's assistant, a composed woman named Lydia, approached with a clipboard. "Miss Hayes, your fitting is scheduled in 15 minutes. Mr. Wells wants you to be ready for the evening event." "The evening event?" Clara asked, startled. "The charity gala," Lydia replied. "Your debut as his fiancée." The fitting room was a blur of fabric and mirrors. Seamstresses pinned, adjusted, and measured. When the final dress was zipped, Clara barely recognized herself. The gown shimmered a pale silver under the lights, simple but elegant. Lydia handed her a small velvet box. Inside was a ring modest by billionaire standards, yet still worth more than Clara's yearly income. She looked up at her reflection, half in awe, half in disbelief. "I feel like I am wearing someone else's life," she whispered. "Then wear it well," Lydia said gently. At the gala that night, the chandeliers burned like constellations above the ballroom. The sound of violins filled the air. Adrian appeared at the top of the grand staircase in a black tuxedo, the image of control and quiet power. When he saw her descend, his expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of surprise, maybe admiration. He offered his arm. "Ready?" "As ready as I will ever be," she replied. Every camera turned when they entered the room together. The flash of lights made her heart pound. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Who is she? Where did she come from?" Adrian leaned close and murmured, "Just breathe. You belong here tonight." For a moment, she believed him. They moved through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging polite smiles. She could feel his steady calm beside her, like an anchor in a storm. But then she overheard a voice behind them, a sharp, skeptical laugh. "Adrian Wells and his mystery fiancé," someone said. "Another contract romance, perhaps?" Clara froze. Adrian's hand tightened slightly on hers. "Ignore it," he said under his breath. "People will talk. Let them." The night passed in a blur of conversation and music. By the time they stepped outside, the rain had returned, falling softly over the marble steps. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, shivering slightly. Adrian removed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders without a word. She looked up at him, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "This feels too real for a lie," she said. He smiled faintly. "Maybe some lies are just truths waiting for courage." The limousine door closed behind them, and for the first time, Clara wondered if the contract she signed was not the start of a performance, but the beginning of something she could no longer control. The following morning, the city shimmered with the kind of sunlight that hides every scar. Clara woke in the guest suite of Adrian's penthouse, surrounded by glass and silence. The skyline stretched before her like a painting she could never afford. A handwritten note rested on the bedside table. "Breakfast at 9. Meeting at 10. You will be fine. A. W." She smiled faintly. It was not affection, not yet, but a strange sense of being seen. Downstairs, Lydia guided her through a crash course in etiquette and posture, correcting every small gesture. "Smile with purpose," she said. "Do not apologize for existing." By noon, Clara was sitting in a sleek conference room beside Adrian. Across from them were 3 investors and 2 reporters, all waiting to see the mysterious woman who had captured Seattle's most private billionaire. Adrian introduced her calmly. "This is Clara Hayes," he said. "She is my partner, and the reason I decided to expand our community housing initiative." For a moment, Clara forgot her nerves. She spoke about design, about creating affordable spaces that felt human. The room fell quiet. Adrian watched her, not as a man observing a hired actress, but as someone seeing a truth he had not expected. Afterward, when they stepped into the elevator, he turned to her. "You handled that better than I did." "I was terrified," she said, laughing softly. "My hands were shaking the entire time." "Then you hide fear better than most CEOs I know." The doors opened to the rooftop terrace, a private garden above the city. Clara walked to the edge, wind catching her hair, and for a heartbeat, the world felt wide again. Adrian joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You still think this is all a lie?" he asked quietly. "I think it began as one," she said, taking the cup. "But it is starting to feel complicated." That night, she sat in her room, sketching building outlines on the back of a napkin. A knock at the door startled her. Adrian stood there, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, holding a folder. "There is something I want to show you," he said. In the study, he spread architectural blueprints across the desk. "This is the project we are launching next quarter, a housing complex designed for single parents and veterans. I wanted to ask for your input." "My input?" she said, surprised. "You see things differently," he replied. "You see people, not profit." Their eyes met, and the silence between them thickened, not awkward but fragile, like the space before a confession. Days turned into weeks. Public events, press photos, charity galas, they moved together like choreography. But in private, the edges softened. She found him reading in the quiet of dawn, or standing by the window tracing the skyline as if measuring his life by its shadows. She learned that his father had built the company, but not the love that should have come with it. She learned that loneliness could look immaculate. One evening after a fundraiser, the car ride home stretched in silence until she spoke. "Why me, really?" He looked out the window. "Because you reminded me what it means to be decent. Because you did something for nothing." Her chest tightened. "That does not mean I belong in your world." "Then maybe my world needs to change," he said softly. Thunder rolled in the distance. When they reached the penthouse, the power flickered. Adrian lit a candle, its flame reflecting in his eyes. The air between them felt electric, uncertain. She set her glass down, her voice trembling. "This is dangerous. If we keep pretending, I might forget that it is an act." "Then let us both forget," he whispered. For a single second, they stood inches apart, the city rumbling outside like a warning. But before either could move, the doorbell shattered the moment. Lydia's voice called from the hall, tight and urgent. "Mr. Wells, there is a problem. Someone leaked the contract to the press." The words hit like cold rain. Clara's heart stopped. Adrian's face hardened, all warmth vanishing. He took a deep breath and met her eyes. "Do not talk to anyone," he said. "Not a word, not even to defend yourself." Cameras were already flashing outside. When they looked down from the balcony, the headlines glowed on phone screens across the street. Adrian Wells's fake fiancé scandal exposed. The lie they thought they controlled had just broken loose, and with it, the fragile truth they were too afraid to name. Reporters crowded the entrance of the Wells Tower before sunrise. Cameras flashed, voices shouted her name, and every lens seemed to pierce straight through Clara's chest. Lydia pushed her through a side door, whispering, "Do not answer questions. Stay upstairs until we manage this." By noon, every major network had the story. Contract fiancé, fabricated romance, business hoax. Clara sat on the couch of the penthouse, hands clasped tight, watching her own photograph appear beside headlines that twisted every word. Adrian had been in meetings since morning. When he finally walked through the door, his expression was unreadable, the calm of a man cornered but refusing to flinch. "I can fix this," he said quietly. "But it will mean denying everything. I will say you were a consultant, nothing more." Clara stood, trembling. "So you will let them call me a liar?" "If I do not, the board will vote me out tomorrow," he said. "Thousands of jobs will collapse. I cannot lose the company over a rumor." Her voice cracked. "It was not a rumor when you asked me to trust you." Adrian looked away. "Trust does not pay salaries." The silence stretched like a wound. She took off the ring and placed it on the table between them. "Then I guess this was never about trust." That night, she packed her things and left before dawn. The sky was gray, the streets slick with rain. She rode the bus again, the same route, the same seat, except now there was no stranger to pay for, only her reflection in the window, pale and tired. Days blurred. She found a small job at a design workshop downtown, filing plans and sketching in the quiet hours. Every headline that mentioned. Adrian faded a little more each day, replaced by new scandals and bigger names. But the ache of betrayal stayed sharp. Then, one afternoon, a brown envelope arrived at her work desk. No return address. Inside was the silver pen she had used to sign the contract, and a note written in Adrian's careful handwriting. "You were right. Some lies ruin lives. I am done with them." The next morning, the news broke again. Adrian Wells had resigned as CEO of Wells and Hartman. Reporters speculated that he had walked away from billions. Clara read the article twice, unsure if she felt vindicated or heartbroken. 3 weeks later, a letter from a charity foundation invited her to a community groundbreaking ceremony in Pioneer Square. She almost ignored it until she saw the name at the bottom, the Wells Initiative for Affordable Housing. The day of the event, sunlight cut through thin clouds, casting gold across the construction site. Volunteers in yellow vests hammered and measured, laughter carrying through the air. On a stage at the front, a familiar figure stood at the microphone. Adrian, dressed simply, no tie, sleeves rolled. When he saw her in the crowd, his words faltered for a beat. Then he smiled faintly and continued. "This project began as a business plan. It became a lesson, because one woman reminded me that a home is not built from profit, but from heart." Applause swelled. Clara felt her throat tighten. When the event ended, he stepped down from the stage and walked straight toward her. "I was not sure you would come," he said softly. "I almost did not," she replied. "But I wanted to see if you meant it." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a set of architectural plans, her sketches, redrawn and stamped with the foundation's seal. "Your designs," he said. "I made sure they would be built exactly as you dreamed." She looked up at him, voice unsteady. "You did not have to do this." "I did," he said, "because you gave me back my integrity when I had none left." For a long moment, they stood in the middle of the construction dust and sunlight, the sound of hammers echoing like distant applause. Then Adrian reached into his pocket and pulled out the same silver pen. "I cannot offer you another contract," he said quietly. "Only a promise." Clara smiled through the blur of tears. "Promises sound better anyway." He handed her the pen, and as their fingers brushed, the world felt still again, not a performance, not a bargain, just two people standing where truth finally began. Weeks passed, and the construction site slowly transformed into the shape of something real. Clara visited often, walking between unfinished walls and the smell of fresh timber. Children's laughter drifted from a nearby playground, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe without looking over her shoulder. Adrian kept his distance at first, letting her lead the design process. She noticed how he listened more than he spoke, how his confidence had changed from sharp authority to quiet conviction. One afternoon, she caught him kneeling beside a worker, helping to carry lumber through the mud. The image struck her harder than any headline ever could. Later that day, she found him alone by the fence, his hands covered in dust. "You look different," she said. He smiled faintly. "I feel different. Do you miss it? The office, the power, the press?" "Not really," he said. "All I ever built before were towers. I never built something that mattered." They stood together watching the sun fall behind the steel frames of what would become homes for dozens of families. The air smelled of rain and pine, and the city hummed quietly beyond the skyline. A month later, the grand opening arrived. The buildings gleamed beneath white banners that read, "The Clara Hayes Community Project." She had not known he would name it after her until the curtain fell and applause swept across the courtyard. Adrian turned toward her with that same calm smile. "I told them the truth this time," he said. "That you were the reason any of this exists." Reporters approached, cameras clicking, but neither of them flinched. Clara spoke clearly, her voice steady through the microphone. "Sometimes love does not begin with romance. Sometimes it begins with respect. This project is proof of that." That evening, as the crowd faded and twilight painted the sky, Adrian led her back inside one of the finished apartments. It was small but perfect, a kitchen that smelled of new paint, a view of the park, and a single table in the middle of the room. On it lay a framed photograph of a bus ticket, the edges worn and faded. You kept it, she whispered. He nodded. It reminded me of the moment everything changed. She turned toward him, her voice gentle. You could have had anyone. Why hold on to me? Because you were never for sale, he said simply. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the rain tapping the windows, the same rhythm that had followed them since the first night in the café. Adrian reached into his pocket and took out a small velvet box. Inside, a ring glimmered under the soft light. This is not business, he said. No contracts, no signatures, just a promise that I will never stop earning your trust. Tears filled her eyes. You are serious? He smiled. I was never more serious in my life. She hesitated only a second before nodding. His hands were warm when he slid the ring onto her finger, the gesture slow, deliberate, sacred. Outside, the city lights blurred behind the rain, turning every window into a reflection of gold. When he kissed her, it was quiet and certain, not the staged affection of photographs, but the kind of truth that did not need witnesses. The storm eased, leaving the sound of dripping gutters and distant laughter. They stood at the window together, fingers intertwined, watching the streetlights flicker below. Clara whispered, almost to herself, all this from $2 on a bus. Adrian laughed softly. The best investment I ever made. The camera of the mind lingered on their silhouettes against the glass, two people who had turned a lie into a home. The world outside continued, unaware that a story that began as a contract had just rewritten itself into a vow. If this fake marriage universe pulls you in, subscribe now so you never miss the next chapter. The months that followed felt almost unreal. Clara and Adrian's life settled into a rhythm that was both ordinary and quietly extraordinary. They moved into a modest house near the first housing project they had built together. Every morning, Adrian brewed coffee while she reviewed blueprints at the kitchen table. He had traded boardrooms for construction sites, tailored suits for rolled sleeves. The man who once measured life in profit margins now measured it in people's smiles. One Saturday, they walked through the finished neighborhood, where families were moving in. A small boy waved from a window, his laughter echoing through the courtyard. Adrian smiled, slipping his hand into hers. Do you hear that? He asked. What? She said. Peace, he answered. But peace, Clara knew, never lasted long in stories that began with contracts. By autumn, whispers began again. Investors who had lost millions after Adrian's resignation were now demanding legal action. News outlets speculated about his disappearance from the corporate world, and one morning, a black car parked across the street, the kind that belonged to lawyers, not visitors. Inside, Adrian read the letter that came with it. His father's former partner had filed a lawsuit accusing him of misusing company funds to build the community homes. It was absurd. The project had been fully transparent, but the accusations were loud enough to make headlines. Clara watched him pace the living room, jaw tight. We can fight this, she said. I know, he replied. But fighting means more cameras, more noise. I am tired of noise. That evening, while he sat on the porch, staring into the fading light, she brought him a cup of tea. You taught me something, she said softly. You said a home is not built from profit, but from heart. Let the world see that. Let them see who you are now. The next week, Adrian held a press conference not in a hotel ballroom or office tower, but in front of the housing community itself. Reporters crowded near the gates, their microphones raised. Clara stood behind him as he spoke. I am not here to defend myself, he said. The records are open. The truth is simple. This project was built with my money, but it belongs to everyone who lives here. If kindness is now considered fraud, then let me be guilty. The crowd fell silent. Someone began to clap, then another, until the sound rolled like thunder. The lawsuit collapsed within a week. Evidence surfaced that the accusations had been fabricated by the same rival board members who once pushed him to deny Clara's existence. That night, back at home, Adrian exhaled for the first time in weeks. It is over, he said. Clara smiled, leaning against the kitchen counter. Then maybe now we can finally start. He looked at her, a little stunned. Start what? Life, she said simply. Winter arrived early that year. Snow covered the roofs of the new community homes, and children built forts in the park while adults hung lights along the fences. On Christmas Eve, Clara and Adrian hosted a small dinner in their living room. Lydia, now a project manager for the foundation, brought homemade pie. The laughter was easy, the warmth real. When the guests left, Clara found herself standing at the window, watching the snow fall in the quiet street. Adrian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You know," he whispered, "when I met you, I thought you were saving me with $2. She turned in his arms, smiling. Maybe we saved each other. The clock struck midnight. Outside, fireworks painted the sky in gold and silver. Adrian reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver pen, now scratched and worn from use. "You once told me that promises sound better than contracts," he said. "So here is another promise, no more secrets, no more shame, just this." He placed the pen in her hand. "Use it to design our next chapter." Clara looked up, her eyes shining. "What should I build?" He smiled. "Anything that keeps us honest." As they stood there, under the soft light of the tree, the world beyond their window blurred into a gentle glow. The snow kept falling, erasing footprints, forgiving everything that came before. Their story, once bound by a signature, had finally rewritten itself in ink that did not fade, love that did not need proof, only presence. Spring returned quietly, soft and green, carrying the scent of wet earth and new beginnings. The housing project had become a living neighborhood now, filled with laughter, bicycles, and windows glowing at dusk. Clara spent most mornings walking the paths between the buildings, clipboard in hand, checking repairs and greeting families by name. Everyone called her Miss Clara, though she always laughed and said, "Just Clara, please." Adrian had taken on a new role at the foundation, mentoring young architects who wanted to design for purpose rather than prestige. He no longer wore suits. Instead, his days were marked by rolled sleeves, dirt under his nails, and a calm that came from building with his hands. One afternoon he found Clara sketching in the park near the community center. The sun caught in her hair, and the silver pen glimmered between her fingers. "Do you ever miss who we used to be?" he asked, sitting beside her. She smiled without looking up. "No, I just wish we had learned sooner who we were meant to become." He laughed softly. "That sounds like something you would frame on a wall." "Maybe I will," she said, right next to the bus ticket. Life had settled into something warm and real, but fate had one last test. That summer, a powerful storm hit the city, flooding part of the lower neighborhood. Clara and Adrian rushed to the site in the early hours, rain pelting their faces. The water had crept into several homes, families scrambling to higher ground. Without hesitation, Adrian waded into the knee-deep water, helping an elderly man carry his belongings to safety. Clara followed, guiding children toward the shelter. By dawn, the storm had eased. The damage was heavy, but no one had been hurt. Exhausted and soaked, Clara stood beside Adrian as the first light broke through the clouds. He looked around at the families, shivering but safe, and whispered, "We built this place to protect people. Today, it protected itself." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You see, no lawsuit, no scandal, no lie can destroy what is real." He turned to her with a faint smile. "And what is real, Clara?" She met his gaze, her voice steady. "Us." The word lingered in the cool morning air, simple and absolute. Around them, volunteers began cleaning debris, laughter rising again like a song. The storm had tested their work, their patience, and their bond, and for the first time, Clara realized that every challenge they had faced was never about survival, but proof. Love, she thought, was not the promise written on paper. It was the hands that stayed when everything else washed away. Summer slowly faded into golden evenings and long shadows. The neighborhood that had survived the storm now bloomed stronger than before. Flowers grew where floodwater once stood, and laughter returned to every corner. For Clara and Adrian, the chaos had settled into something calm, an ordinary happiness that neither of them had ever known before. One morning, Clara stood before a group of architecture students visiting the community as part of their internship. She explained how design was more than blueprints and numbers, it was empathy turned into structure. Her voice carried across the courtyard, clear and confident. Adrian watched from a distance, pride softening every line of his face. When the session ended, he walked over, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You are turning into the teacher everyone wishes they had," he said. She smiled. "And you are turning into the man I always hoped you could be," he laughed. "That sounds like a compliment and a challenge." "It is both," she said, bumping his shoulder lightly. Later that week, they attended a city awards ceremony honoring humanitarian projects. The hall was elegant, filled with officials and reporters. Clara wore a simple blue dress. Adrian stood beside her in a dark suit, the same silver pen clipped to his pocket. When the announcer called their names, the applause was warm and genuine. As they stepped on stage, Clara took the microphone first. "This project began with a mistake," she said, smiling faintly. "A bus fare I could barely afford, but it taught me that generosity travels further than any plan. It can rebuild not just homes, but hearts." When Adrian spoke, his voice was low and steady. "I once believed success meant control. I was wrong. Real success is standing next to someone who believed in you before the world did." The audience rose to their feet. Cameras flashed, but this time the light felt different, not invasive, but celebratory. After the ceremony, they returned to the park that connected the community blocks. The air was cool and filled with the hum of crickets. Streetlights glowed on wet pavement from an earlier rain. Adrian reached into his jacket and took out an envelope. "What is this?" Clara asked. He handed it to her. Inside was a single sketch, the original drawing she made on a diner napkin months before. "I kept it," he said. "It reminded me where everything started." She looked down at the faded lines, then back at him. "Why give it to me now?" "Because beginnings deserve to come home," he said. "And because I have one more to offer." He knelt slightly, not with the grandeur of a public proposal, but with quiet certainty. From his pocket, he pulled out a small ring, simple, elegant, warm under the light. "No contracts, no deadlines, just forever, if you still want it." Her answer came without hesitation. "Yes," she whispered, "always." The city lights blinked beyond them as the night carried their promise. What began as an arrangement born of desperation had turned into something no paper could contain, a truth written only in trust. A year later, spring returned again, gentle and full of color. The morning air carried the scent of lilac through the open windows of their small home. Clara woke first, sunlight spilling across the sheets, and watched Adrian sleep beside her. His hair was a little longer now. A faint scar still traced his temple from the flood cleanup months ago, but peace had found him. It had found them both. The world outside had not stopped talking about their story. Newspapers called it the contract that became a legacy. Documentaries showed the community that grew from one impossible proposal. But to Clara and Adrian, it was never about fame. It was about the people whose lives now filled those streets, about the laughter that replaced sirens, about the families who finally had doors to lock and dreams to chase. Every weekend, they walked together through the neighborhood park, where everything had started. The benches were engraved with the names of donors. The community center bore the Wells Foundation crest, and near the fountain stood a framed piece of glass. Behind it, a faded bus ticket and a silver pen. The inscription below read, "The beginning of everything honest." That morning, children were chasing each other through the grass, their voices bright against the city hum. A little girl ran past and nearly tripped, but Adrian caught her by the arm just in time. She giggled and said, "Thank you, mister," before darting away. Clara smiled as she watched him. "Still rescuing strangers, I see." He shrugged lightly. "Old habits." They sat on the same bench they had chosen the day he proposed, the sound of water soft in the background. Adrian turned toward her, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about that night in the café?" "Every day," she said. "Because that was the moment I stopped believing life happens by accident." He nodded slowly. "And I stopped believing love is a contract." She reached for his hand, their fingers fitting as naturally as breath. We built all this because of a mistake that turned out right. Adrian smiled. The best mistake we ever made. The church bells across the street began to ring, their echoes spreading through the city like a heartbeat. Families opened windows, waving from balconies. For a moment, everything stood still, the buildings, the light, the noise. The world felt perfectly aligned, as if it had been waiting for this ending all along. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, her voice soft. I think we finally wrote our real story. And it is one worth keeping, he said. The camera of memory closed on them, sitting there, framed by the city. They rebuilt together two ordinary people who turned a lie into legacy, a contract into commitment, and a fleeting act of kindness into a forever home. If you want more Untold Billionaire love, subscribe and choose your next chapter on screen.